Get ready, because August 22nd is not simply another date passing quietly across the calendar. And if you move through this day without understanding what is happening above you, you may completely miss the deeper shift taking place underneath your everyday life. Today, the Sun leaves Leo and crosses into Virgo, and under ordinary circumstances, that would simply mark another change in the astrological season. But these are not ordinary circumstances. We are moving through the middle of an eclipse portal, suspended between the total solar eclipse that shook Leo on August 12th and the partial lunar eclipse in Pisces that is approaching on August 28th. Right in the center of that intense cosmic passage, the Sun enters Virgo and begins a profound reset that will reorganize 5 fundamental areas of your life. And if you have recently noticed something unusual happening inside your body, especially a strange heaviness around your stomach, unexplained, bloating tension, or an unsettling sensation in your gut that seems difficult to connect to anything logical, do not dismiss it immediately as random discomfort. Stay with me, because there is a specific reason this experience may feel so pronounced right now, and understanding the symbolism behind it can change the way you interpret everything that has been happening. The next 7 days deserve your full attention, because the period leading toward August 28th is not necessarily a gentle transition from one energetic chapter into another. It can feel more like a dismantling process, as though structures you once assumed would remain stable are suddenly being questioned, loosened, or removed. You may look at the changes around you and call them stress, bad timing, disappointment, or simply an unusually difficult week. But the deeper astrological story suggests something much more significant is unfolding. The difference is whether you experience yourself as someone being dragged through the change, or someone consciously moving with it toward a completely different version of life. And here is the part that can easily be overlooked. The hours before the Sun actually changes signs may matter just as much as the moment of the transition itself. Many people will focus on the moment when the Sun enters Virgo today at around 10 at night, but the energetic story begins earlier on August 22nd. Before leaving Leo, the Sun reaches the anaretic degree, the final degree of the sign, a point traditionally associated with urgency, culmination, pressure, and crisis. It is the final edge of Leo, the last concentrated expression of that sign before the Sun crosses into something entirely different. Imagine standing at the final doorway of a room that has shaped you for a long time, knowing that once you walk through it, you cannot return as exactly the same person. At that precise degree, the Sun forms an exact opposition to the North Node in Aquarius. This places the Sun directly across from the South Node in Leo, bringing attention to a karmic release point, a place where familiar attachments, old patterns, and identities that have outlived their purpose can become increasingly difficult to hold on to. The South Node can symbolize the behaviors you automatically return to because they feel familiar, even when familiarity is no longer the same thing as safety. In Leo, that can involve the need for recognition, the desire to be admired, the hunger for approval, or an identity built around being noticed and occupying the center of the story. You may have spent years constructing an image of who you believed you needed to be, perhaps becoming the person who performs well, receives praise, keeps everyone impressed, or quietly measures your worth through the attention you receive from others. Then, just before the Sun enters Virgo, the symbolism becomes impossible to ignore. Something within you may begin realizing that the old role cannot continue forever. The question is no longer how to remain the person everyone notices, but whether that identity actually represents who you are becoming. This is why the strange emptiness many people have felt in recent days can seem so difficult to explain. It may feel like emotional distance, exhaustion, uncertainty, or an unexplained loss of enthusiasm, but symbolically, it can also resemble the fading of an identity that once gave you a strong sense of definition. Something familiar is becoming less convincing. even though the replacement has not fully appeared yet. That in-between state can be uncomfortable because the human mind prefers certainty. We would rather hold on to an outdated identity than stand in an empty space where we do not yet know what comes next. But that empty space is part of the transformation. When the sun finally enters Virgo a few hours later, the atmosphere shifts toward a new territory where the emphasis moves away from performance and toward usefulness, discernment, refinement, and rebuilding from the ground up. This is the first of the 5 resets, and it creates the foundation for everything that follows. Your identity is being rewritten, not because you are becoming less important, but because you are being challenged to define your importance differently. The old question was, how can I make people notice me? How can I prove myself? How can I receive recognition? And how can I remain at the center of the story? The emerging question is much more grounded and much more revealing. How can I contribute something real? How can I become genuinely useful? And how can I build a life that has value even when nobody is watching? That shift may feel subtle at first, but once you recognize it, you may realize that what appeared to be emptiness was actually the beginning of release, and that realization leads directly into the next stage of this powerful reset. What may look like a small internal adjustment is actually far more profound than it appears, because this kind of identity shift can reach into the very foundation of how you have learned to define yourself. Many people spend years shaping their lives around an imagined audience, carefully managing an image, building a reputation, maintaining a professional identity, and measuring their worth through performance. Then something changes quietly. There is no dramatic announcement, no obvious collapse, and no single moment where everything falls apart. Instead, you may wake up one morning and discover that the identity you have been carrying no longer feels like it belongs to you. You look at your social media presence, your job title, your reputation, the image you have worked so hard to maintain. And instead of feeling proud or angry or devastated, you feel almost nothing. That emptiness can be unsettling because you may wonder what is wrong with you, when in reality the deeper issue is that something false is losing its power over you. The Virgo reset is not concerned with preserving appearances. It asks a much more practical question. What are you actually contributing? What function do you serve in the life you are living right now? Not the person you plan to become 5 years from now, not the impressive version of yourself you describe to other people, but the person who gets up each day and participates in the ordinary reality of life. What do you make better? What do you build? What do you maintain? What can you genuinely do? This question is not designed to make you feel small or insignificant. It is designed to pull you out of performance and bring you back into reality. Once the need to impress disappears, something far more durable can emerge, something based on capability rather than applause. This is the movement from seeking validation toward developing real skills, from wanting to be admired toward becoming someone whose presence is genuinely necessary. And for many of you, this process has already been underway. You may have felt yourself becoming less interested in proving something, less willing to perform a role simply because other people expected it, or strangely detached from achievements that once seemed extremely important. You may not have known how to describe the change, but now the pattern becomes easier to recognize. And just as your relationship with your identity begins to change, your relationships with other people are being pushed toward an equally uncompromising moment of truth. On August 21st, the day before the sun enters Virgo, Venus in Libra forms an exact opposition to Saturn in Aries. On the surface, this is an astrological configuration, but emotionally it can feel like a private examination of the relationships you have built and the compromises you have made to keep them intact. Venus seeks harmony, affection, connection, and the experience of partnership, feeling beautiful and natural. Saturn operates differently. Saturn asks whether the foundation beneath that beauty can actually carry weight. It asks, whether there is mutual respect beneath the affection, whether both people are taking responsibility, and whether the connection exists because two people genuinely choose each other, or because one or both are afraid of what being alone might mean. This opposition creates a confrontation between desire and reality, between what you want emotionally and what the relationship is actually capable of sustaining. For some people, that realization may arrive through distance. A partner who once felt close may suddenly seem emotionally unavailable. A relationship that appeared stable may reveal a coldness that had been developing quietly for much longer than you realized. A conversation may expose how far apart two people have become, even if neither person wanted to admit it. But do not immediately interpret that discomfort as punishment. The purpose of this tension is to expose the places where you have accepted less than you truly need, where keeping the peace became more important than protecting your boundaries, and where fear of confrontation allowed another person to cross lines you once promised yourself would remain firm. Sometimes the most painful realization is not that someone changed, but that you slowly abandoned your own standards in order to keep the relationship functioning. Then, the Sun enters Virgo the following day, and the energy shifts toward practical action. Instead of waiting for circumstances to magically repair themselves, you begin examining what is actually happening. You become more willing to establish boundaries, speak honestly, address uncomfortable subjects, and distinguish between what you are genuinely prepared to build and what you can no longer continue carrying. This does not mean destroying love. It means refusing to preserve a form of love that has no stable foundation. The relationships capable of surviving this transit can become stronger because they have been tested by reality rather than protected by illusion. And the connections that cannot survive the pressure may reveal that their stability was never as permanent as you believed. Somewhere inside, you may already know which relationships belong in which category. The next revelation brings the message even closer to home, because the story does not stop with identity or partnership. It moves directly into the body. Remember that unusual sensation around your stomach that I mentioned earlier. There may be a reason it has felt impossible to ignore. Less than 24 hours after the Sun enters Virgo, it forms a perfect trine with Chiron in Taurus. Chiron represents the wounded healer, the archetype of a profound injury that cannot simply be erased, but can instead be transformed into understanding and wisdom. In Taurus, that wound can be connected to the physical body and to the deeply rooted belief that rest must be earned. You may have learned to associate your value with how much you produce, how much you accomplish, how useful you are, or how long you can continue pushing yourself without stopping. Somewhere along the way, slowing down may have started to feel like weakness. The body can carry that belief long after the conscious mind has stopped questioning it. This is where the symbolism becomes especially significant. Virgo governs the digestive system, the small intestine, the pancreas, and the intricate network of nerves in the abdomen that scientists refer to as the second brain. This system contains hundreds of millions of neurons and produces the great majority of the serotonin in your body. And that connection gives the next stage of this astrological story an even deeper emotional dimension. Because what you have been carrying internally may be preparing to become something you can finally recognize, understand, and transform as the story moves forward. Your body does far more than process what you eat, and during a period this intense, the symbolism of the digestive system becomes impossible to ignore. It can feel as though your entire inner world has been asking to be processed, not only physical nourishment, but information, emotional experiences, unresolved trauma, and everything you have absorbed without giving yourself enough time to understand it. You may have been moving through eclipse season powered almost entirely by adrenaline, continuing forward because stopping felt impossible, while taking in the emotional turbulence and intensity of this month without creating enough space to process what was happening inside you. Eventually, That accumulated pressure can seem to make itself known through the area of the body associated with digestion. Bloating, strange sensations, sudden food sensitivities, heaviness, or mental fog can become impossible to overlook, and within the symbolic language of astrology, these experiences can represent a deeper message about the pace at which you have been living. Your body may have been signaling that something needs attention, while your conscious mind remained focused on performing, producing, solving, achieving, and keeping everything moving. The Sun, forming a trine with Chiron in Taurus on August 27th, speaks directly to that pattern. This is not simply about taking a short break and then returning to the same exhausting cycle. It represents a deeper correction in the way you understand rest itself. Rest does not need to be treated as something you earn only after proving your productivity. It becomes part of what allows you to continue functioning. The deeper lesson is that your worth does not increase when you produce more, and it does not disappear when you stop. You are allowed to exist without constantly presenting evidence that you deserve your place. This is the reset that moves through the body, and it asks you to reconsider what you are allowing into your system. That can include food, but it can also symbolically include information, constant noise, emotional stimulation, endless demands, and the mental clutter created by never giving yourself permission to become still. Your body has been trying to get your attention, and the shift coming through this transit invites you to finally listen to what you have repeatedly pushed aside. If you have been dismissing these sensations as nothing more than stress or coincidence, this is the point where greater awareness becomes important. In the symbolic framework of this reading, they are not meaningless interruptions. They are part of a larger recalibration, and the cosmic timing creates a window for you to respond differently, instead of continuing to override every signal. Then the story moves from the body into the mind, and this next shift can feel dramatically different. On August 27th, the Sun and Mercury meet at the exact degree in Virgo in an alignment known as a cazimi. This is not being presented as an ordinary meeting between two planets. Mercury rules Virgo, and Mercury is exalted in Virgo, placing Mercury in one of its strongest possible positions as it sits within the heart of the Sun. Symbolically, this creates an atmosphere in which confusion, hesitation, and mental fog can be burned away and replaced by a sharper awareness of what actually matters. Think back to the weeks that came before this moment. Eclipse energy may have made everything feel emotionally turbulent, difficult to organize, or strangely uncertain. You may have tried to make decisions while your thoughts seemed to move slowly, as though every conclusion required enormous effort. You could understand pieces of the situation without being able to see the entire picture. You might have attempted to organize your priorities, make sense of your emotions, or determine which direction to take, only to find yourself returning to the same questions again and again. Then August 27th arrives, and the symbolism of the cazimi suggests a sudden change in the quality of that mental experience. Rather than slowly becoming clearer over time, insight can feel immediate, like a light switching on inside a room that had been dark for weeks. A problem that seemed tangled beyond resolution may suddenly reveal the point where it can be untangled. A decision you have been carrying back and forth in your mind may no longer require endless analysis, because the answer becomes obvious to you. The mental cycle of questioning, doubting, revisiting, and second-guessing can finally lose its grip, allowing your mind to operate with a precision you may have forgotten you possessed. This is the cognitive reset, the moment when the mental operating system is symbolically upgraded and the information that was previously scattered begins arranging itself into something coherent. The timing matters, because this clarity does not arrive in isolation. It comes after the identity crisis has begun stripping away an outdated version of yourself, after relationship realities have forced you to examine what can actually remain, and after the body has started demanding a different relationship with rest and pressure. There is a sequence here. When your identity is constantly occupied with proving itself, your judgment becomes distorted. When relationships repeatedly drain your emotional resources, clear decision-making becomes harder. When your nervous system is overwhelmed by survival mode, accessing your full mental capacity can feel almost impossible. The first three resets symbolically reduce those layers of interference. The fourth turns the lights back on. This becomes the moment to reorganize your life, rethink your work, arrange the scattered pieces of a plan that has existed only as fragments in your mind, and establish intentions with the kind of exactness associated with Mercury operating through Virgo. This level of mental clarity may not feel ordinary, which is precisely why the opportunity matters. When your mind finally becomes quiet enough to recognize what has been in front of you all along, you do not want to waste that awareness by returning immediately to the patterns that created the confusion. And yet, just when you begin believing that everything can finally be organized, controlled, analyzed, and placed neatly into a system, the final movement arrives. August 28th brings the full moon and the partial lunar eclipse in Pisces, and the atmosphere changes once again. You've spent the preceding week immersed in Virgo energy, focusing on organization, analysis, repair, optimization, practical systems, and stronger boundaries. You've been learning how to arrange the pieces, identify the problems, and make improvements wherever possible. Then Pisces enters the picture and confronts the very thing Virgo is most uncomfortable surrendering: control. This shift is not necessarily gentle, because lunar eclipses are associated with endings, culminations, and emotional breakthroughs that can arrive with the force of something you can no longer keep contained. After everything you have tried to organize, the Pisces eclipse asks what happens when life refuses to fit perfectly inside the structure you created. And that final tension between Virgo control and Pisces surrender is where the next stage of the transformation begins. A lunar eclipse can remove what you are still trying to hold together, and it rarely waits for you to decide whether the timing feels convenient. People can leave, circumstances can change, beliefs can lose their meaning, and situations that once seemed permanent can reach their natural conclusion because they have already served the purpose they were meant to serve. The Pisces eclipse brings a lesson that can be difficult for a highly organized mind to accept. You've already done the work. You have examined the machinery, identified what was broken, cleaned up what needed to be cleaned, and tried to make the system function better. Now comes the part that cannot be completed through another plan. You have to loosen your grip on the outcome. There are problems that were never yours to solve, responsibilities that were never yours to carry, and wounds that cannot be healed through greater effort alone. Sometimes the final act of healing is not another attempt to fix something, but the willingness to step back completely and trust that life can continue without your constant intervention. This can be especially challenging because the shadow side of Virgo is not simply disorder or laziness. Its deeper shadow is the belief that enough planning, enough preparation, enough analysis, and enough anxiety can protect you from uncertainty. It is the assumption that if you work hard enough, organize every detail perfectly, anticipate every possible consequence, and prepare for every potential problem, then nothing painful will ever happen. The Pisces eclipse challenges that belief at its foundation. It exposes the limits of control and asks you to discover a form of strength that does not depend on controlling every variable. What emerges from that confrontation is not helplessness, but a more complete understanding of healing. Real healing can require both practical care and faith. You can create an extraordinarily effective system and still encounter something that cannot be managed by a checklist. You can take care of the physical body while recognizing that the mind needs attention too, and the mind itself can eventually remind you that the soul also needs room to breathe. That is where the final piece comes together. The 5 resets are no longer separate experiences. They converge into one larger transformation, creating a version of you capable of holding two seemingly opposite qualities at the same time. You can become practical without becoming rigid. You can become disciplined without becoming obsessed with control. You can pay attention to details without losing your freedom. You can make plans while remaining open to what cannot be planned. That integration is the deeper purpose of everything that has been unfolding. So now, step back and look at the entire sequence instead of judging each event separately. Across the next 7 days, these resets can feel remarkably connected, less like unrelated disruptions and more like a carefully unfolding dismantling of structures that no longer function in your life. Your identity is being stripped down to what is genuine. Your relationships are being tested against reality. Your body is demanding that you pay attention to what you have been overriding. Your mind is being cleared so that you can recognize what has been difficult to see. And finally, your attachment to control is being challenged so that there is room for something you could never have designed in advance. That may sound overwhelming, especially if you are already feeling emotionally tired, but there is one distinction you need to hold on to. You are not being destroyed. You are being refined. This is Virgo energy, expressed at a higher level, not as criticism, punishment, or impossible perfectionism, but as the sacred process of separating what truly nourishes you from what quietly drains you. Think of the harvest. The dead growth has to be cut away so that the living grain can be gathered. What is removed is not necessarily being removed because it was worthless. Some things are simply no longer alive in the way they once were. The version of you that emerges on August 29th can be calmer, steadier, and more capable than the person watching this right now, not because the universe suddenly handed you an entirely different life, but because the obstacles covering your existing strengths have finally begun to clear. The qualities you needed were not necessarily missing. They were buried beneath identities, habits, relationships, physical exhaustion, mental noise, and the constant demand to control outcomes. This week is not simply happening against you. The deeper message is that it is happening for you. The people who recognize that distinction are the ones who can stop treating discomfort as evidence that something has gone wrong and begin working consciously with the transformation instead. Those are the people who enter September changed. Others may feel the pressure and immediately resist it. They may blame work, relationships, stress, exhaustion, or bad timing for everything, becoming more difficult without recognizing that the disruption itself was revealing a path toward their own evolution. They become so focused on fighting the change that they never stop long enough to understand what the change is trying to show them. Do not make that mistake. If this message reached you, the important thing is not to assume that every feeling must be interpreted as a cosmic command, but to become more observant of what is genuinely changing within your own experience. Today, when the sun crosses into Virgo, pay attention. Notice what your body is communicating. Notice which people remain present and which connections begin creating distance. Notice the thoughts that arrive with unusual clarity. Notice the moments when something you have been trying to force suddenly seems easier to release. And most importantly, notice the moment you understand that letting go is not automatically a sign of weakness. Sometimes releasing your grip requires more courage than continuing to fight. That is why this moment can represent a turning point. You are standing at the edge between an old way of operating and a different one, and the choice is not necessarily about controlling what happens next. It is about becoming conscious enough to recognize what is already changing. Thank you for staying with me through this message. If this content resonated with you and you want to continue exploring astrology, spiritual growth, and these deeper cycles of transformation, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support is genuinely appreciated. You can also share your own experiences and thoughts in the comments, especially if you have noticed changes in your identity, relationships, body, or state of mind during this period. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next message.